In today's video, we're going to be using one of Kenhub's premium features to help you understand one of the most important structures in the entire digestive system, the duodenum. So to do this, we're going to be using one of Kenhub's study units. Like I mentioned, this is a premium feature. You can see this is basically like a really detailed and thorough lesson that is going to give you everything you could possibly need to know about the structure. So we put videos, we have quizzes, we have our amazing atlas images, which I'm going to be real with you, I think they're the best on the entire internet or just in the entire world in general, and that's a biased statement, but I'm willing to fight you in the comments if I need to because it is true. Again, you can see more atlas images. In fact, these are the ones we're going to be using today, but then there's even more just going beyond it. We have key facts and points. We even have exams with this study unit, and then at the very bottom you can see we have articles. Now these articles are 100% free, and in fact I'm going to go ahead and leave a link down the description below to this very article here on the duodenum so you can kind of read through that at home and see just how awesome those articles are. But let's go ahead and scroll on up, and we are going to be focusing here. Now I'm going to click this little magnifying glass icon, and as I do that, that is going to enlarge the image. And what we're going to do is just kind of go through the anatomy of the duodenum and give you some basic facts about each one of the structures, substructures, and things of that nature. Now, quickly, I just want to orient you so you can understand what you are looking at. So this like bumpy thing right here, this is the pancreas. The pancreas is both an endocrine and an exocrine gland, and in this case, we're going to be more focused on its exocrine function, which basically is what it's secreting into this tube right here, which is the duodenum. Now we can also see blood vessels like the hepatic portal vein, but our focus is going to be on this. In my mind, it kind of looks like a elbow noodle, like a macaroni noodle. This right here is the duodenum, and in fact the duodenum, which stands for 12 fingers wide or 12 finger breadth, so that's like 4 fingers, 4 fingers, 4 fingers, that's how long the duodenum is. This is the very first part of the small intestine, and so what you are seeing here, and we don't really highlight it, is the end of the stomach. This is the pylorus of the stomach, and pylorus means gatekeeper. But the first thing we can see is what is highlighted here in green, and that is the pyloric sphincter. Now what's cool in these study units, when you use the magnifying glass, you can see all of the structures are going to be listed on the sides. And you can even see their little, volume. What's the icons? You click on it, can kind of say the name in case you're wondering, like, how do I say pyloric sphincter? That type of thing. Really, really cool. But this pyloric sphincter is the strongest sphincter in the body. And again, pylorus means gatekeeper, which I think is a fantastic name because it is holding back hydrochloric acid or stomach acid that exists in the stomach. But what I want us to think about is, let's say the stomach has done its job, right? Whatever you ate, whatever you consumed has been bathed in hydrochloric acid, ripped apart as much as the stomach acid possibly could, and now it is slowly going to be let into the duodenum. It is the pyloric sphincter's job to do that. So this sphincter will release, and as it releases, we then start emptying into the duodenum. So the very first part of the duodenum is going to be what's called the superior part. And that's about as much as we can say right here. So what's going to happen is we call it chyme. We should probably say that, right? Once you've kind of like started the digestive process between the mouth and the stomach, added the hydrochloric acid, we now call that chyme. Chyme is going to first empty into that superior part, but then it's immediately going to then start traveling down into the descending part. We call it descending because this is the direction of travel, right? We're going this way and it's going to go down. And from there, it's then going to go to the horizontal part, which you can probably guess as to why it's called the horizontal part, which then will lead to the ascending or ascending part. And then we get to the very first part of, the second part, I should say, of the small intestine called the jejunum. So jejunum actually translates to empty, which is a really interesting name, and it's just trying to illustrate the fact that chyme moves so quickly through this entire tube that this is pretty much always empty even when you're performing dissections. But our goal is not this, it's not really the stomach, our goal is between these sections. And so the next thing we're going to be looking at is what's called the superior duodenal flexure. And all that really means is just where it's bending, right? Where it's turning. So we had that superior part, we had the descending part, and where it's just starting to make that turn is going to be that superior duodenal flexure. We then have where it's now turning and going towards the horizontal part. Remember, that's that flat part at the base of the duodenum, and we call this the inferior duodenal flexure. Nothing really fancy or exciting with those. Again, this is just like things to look at and identify. All right. From there, we then have the duodenojejunal flexure, which is a mouthful to say. Duodenojejunal, because all we're really doing here is saying the flexure is the turn, right? It's the curve, and then you're just adding what parts are there that it's curving between. And so again, this is the jejunum. This is going to be the ascending part, and so we're just going to kind of mix those together. All right, so now we got to focus on what you're looking at as like a step dissection. It's like, imagine like you are a dissector and you are just slowly removing away the layers of the duodenum. What you'd find is that there are going to be multiple layers, right? And the layer we're seeing here in green, if you look at the fiber orientation, you can see that the fibers are running lengthwise this way. Again, we kind of cut into it a bit, but you can see it right there. This is what's called the longitudinal layer. Now, the longitudinal layer is not only found in the small intestine. In fact, it's found in the entire digestive tract. The longitudinal layer is when it contracts. I want you to kind of picture this. It's going to shorten the tube. Because the point is, when chyme comes in here, it makes sense, okay, you kind of push it through here through the muscle of the stomach. Once it gets in here, it makes sense that it can kind of fall. But once you have to imagine, how are you going to start propelling it through the tube? Well, that is where the longitudinal layer comes in, and it's going to shorten the length of the tube. Right, we're getting into this term that people are usually familiar with called peristalsis. Peristalsis is that natural wave-like movement that is going to propel substances through tubes. And in the digestive tract, that is going to be primarily performed by the longitudinal layer. Although, the circular layer, which is this one right here, is also going to help. The circular layer is what's going to perform what's called segmentation. So not only do you want to shorten the length of the tube, you also kind of want to start closing it off. And what you're going to do is you're going to start chunking out the digested material, that chyme, into discrete chunks. And then imagine this, because if you're shortening the tube and moving it lengthwise, you got to close up behind it. So then as it's propelling it, the chyme is stopped up against it and then pushed. And that's exactly what's going to happen. So peristalsis is that natural wave-like movement, and it's kind of performed with a combination of the longitudinal and the circular layer. But then deep to that, that's where you get the submucosa. The submucosa is just where you're going to find, blood vessels and supporting structures and connective tissues and things like that. And then outside of that, or deeper to that, I really should say, which is, by the way, technically outside. I should also say, this is all technically outside your body. And this is kind of a weird fact, but if you had a long enough hand, you could take your hand and you could go all the way from the oral cavity all the way down to the anus, which would be an adventure. But technically that is all outside of the body, because inside the body would be deep to that. Regardless, deeper to this, that's where you're getting into the lumen, you're getting into the mucosal layer, but the submucosa is going to be the supporting area. So then, when we get to that mucosal layer, the mucosa, that's where we start to meet the circular folds. And the circular folds, these look like little ridge lines. It's kind of like an accordion. You can picture, imagine you grab the tube and you can kind of stretch it out and fold it up like this. What these do is two things. First, it increases dramatically the surface area for absorption inside of the small intestine. So, imagine if this was just a completely flat surface, and even if you had absorptive capacity here, it's you're not going to have nearly as much as, imagine if you just created little folds. Because by folding it, you're fitting more stuff into the same space. So circular folds are going to dramatically increase the surface area inside of the digestive tract, and specifically, circular folds are in the small intestine. The next thing that the circular folds do is that chyme, as it's propelled through, it's going to help it corkscrew. It literally is going to spin like a torpedo as it's actually moving through here, which is kind of just a cool effect that it has. All right, so then we meet what's called the major duodenal papilla. So papilla just means nipple, and so someone looked at this a long time ago and was like, that looks like a nipple. And it's a bigger nipple, so if they took the time to say major duodenal papilla, well, we're going to see there is a minor. But this right here is the entry point where we're going to see bile and pancreatic enzymes enter into the duodenum. So like you can see these tubes here, and we'll highlight these in just a moment, but you can see like, or picture that this is where they're going to drop the substances into the duodenum, and that's where we're going to be able to discuss a really important function of the duodenum, which is going to be digestion. So moving along, here we go. So you can see the bile duct, right? So the bile duct, this is what is going to be transporting bile. Now, bile is produced by the liver, it is stored and concentrated in the gallbladder, and then what happens is that bile is dropped down and then inserted through the bile ducts in through that major duodenal papilla, and then it's going to insert into the duodenum. And when it does that, bile is able to help emulsify fats, right? Help to break it down. And this is now, again, where we start to see digestion is occurring. Right, a lot of times when people think of digestion, they're really only thinking of the stomach, which again would be right here. We've just cut it. You can see the pancreas behind it. Digestion is the breaking down of substances. And digestion happens in the mouth. It happens in the stomach, but it is also happening, and in fact, a significant amount is happening here in just the duodenum, right? That 12 fingers wide, long space, there is a significant amount of digestion occurring, and that's because hydrochloric acid just isn't powerful enough to break down a lot of the things that we need it to. And so bile coming from that liver and gallbladder are going to enter through that major duodenal papilla, through the bile duct, and then it's going to help emulsify and break down fats. But then we also have the pancreatic enzymes. So pancreatic enzymes, again, this is produced by the pancreas, which is right here. Like I mentioned, the pancreas is both an endocrine and an exocrine gland. And in this instance, its exocrine function is that pancreatic enzymes. And these enzymes are, filled with various things that are going to break down a lot of stuff. Proteins and fats and carbs. And what's going to happen is it's going to also enter into the duodenum at that major duodenal papilla. And so now you're breaking down fats, and also, by the way, bile is going to be essential at neutralizing the acidity of the hydrochloric acid. That's also a really important function. And so you're going to see both of those tubes are going to just empty into the duodenum at that major duodenal papilla. But then there's also, like I mentioned, the minor duodenal papilla. So this one, if we look really closely, is there's this little offshoot coming up right here. So again, this was the pancreatic duct. Now we have what's called the accessory pancreatic duct, and then that will insert and drop pancreatic enzymes into the minor duodenal papilla. So we'll go back here. This is that minor duodenal papilla. This isn't present in everyone, but it's present enough that we can say and teach it as though it is. As long as you, though, have this going, your pancreas is depositing what it needs to through the major duodenal papilla, it's not a big deal if you don't actually have the accessory duct and that minor duodenal papilla. And that is it. We just went through, here, let me kind of click out, and this is what's kind of cool. You can see 18 different images all about the duodenum, right? So this is all of this is, really interesting. I should also say, like, a good amount of this is what we call retroperitoneal, meaning it's kind of like hidden behind this connective tissue flap that's draping over it. There's so much more we could say, but I just want to show you the power of our study units. And again, we come here, you can see in this image, the liver being reflected back, and you can see the gallbladder, and you can see the pancreas, the duodenum, you can see the transverse colon. There's a lot of things you can see in our study units. There's an additional 15 images here. And again, as I mentioned, as I scroll back up, we even have a video, and this video is 23 minutes long, breaking down everything I said and in way more detail. All of this is part of our study units. But again, if I go ahead and scroll all the way to the bottom, we can even click on this article on the duodenum. This is 100% free, although I will say that the videos embedded at the top aren't those are a premium feature, but look at the rest of this. This is basically a medical encyclopedia. I shouldn't say basically. It is a medical encyclopedia that is going to break down everything you are really going to want to see here. And look at this image. I mean, come on. It is just giving you everything. This is going to be linked down in the description below, so I strongly encourage you to check that out. And while you're down there, go ahead and hit that like button. Small things like that actually go a long way. And also leave us a comment. Let us know what you thought about this video, what you'd like us to discuss in future videos. You name it, we want to hear it. But thanks for hanging out with me, and I will see you in the next video.